The evening sun painted long, golden streaks across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, casting the famous gates in a regal, amber hue. Tourists milled about, snapping selfies, admiring the grandeur of the historic site, and chattering in 100 languages. Among the thinning crowd, a man in his mid-60s moved with deliberate steps, each one more cautious than the last. Jonathan Cooper was a figure both dignified and weary. His face, lined by the passage of time and experience, held the quiet strength of someone who had seen much and survived more. Pinned to his jacket was a small but unmistakable badge, a Royal Air Force veteran's pin, catching the last rays of the sun. It was a symbol of service, of duty rendered across decades. To him, it was also a reminder of days when strength had come easier and breath hadn't felt like a luxury. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below to let me know which country you're watching from. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. As he walked, one hand slipped toward the inner pocket of his coat, fingers brushing the familiar shape of his inhaler. The thickening evening air didn't help. A pressure had begun to build in his chest, a signal he knew too well, the beginnings of an asthma attack. Years in the service hadn't erased that lifelong companion. It didn't announce itself with violence, it crept, slowly robbing his lungs of ease, each breath slightly shallower than the last. Standing nearby in perfect, silent formation was a royal guard. His red tunic and tall bearskin hat were vivid against the grey stone. Though outwardly still, Guard Ashford was anything but idle. At 28 years old, with 8 years of military service behind him, including combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, his posture masked a soldier trained in awareness, discipline, and decisiveness. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, scanned the scene from behind the veil of ceremonial duty. He noticed Cooper's labored breathing, the tremble in his step, and two young men lingering far too long in the veteran's path. Greg Mitchell and Danny Harris leaned casually against a nearby pillar. To an untrained eye, they might have seemed like any other pair of locals, maybe tourists, maybe young Londoners enjoying the late summer evening. But Ashford saw the truth in their body language, the calculated angles of their stance, the subtle shifting of weight, the way their eyes locked on Cooper like hawks to a slow-moving rabbit. Greg was tall, lean, and full of misplaced confidence. Danny, shorter and stockier, had the twitchy energy of someone constantly looking for trouble, or running from it. Both wore pristine tracksuits and spotless trainers, their street fashion at odds with their predatory intent. "Look at this old-timer," Greg muttered to Danny, his accent unmistakably rough, born of London's harder estates. Danny snorted. "Bet that pin's worth something." "He keeps checking his pocket," Greg replied, nodding subtly. "Meds, probably. These old boys always carry something good on them." They didn't approach just yet. They watched. Waited. Their attention was locked on Cooper's increasingly labored movements, like scavengers sensing weakness in a wounded animal. And all the while, Guard Ashford observed, every muscle poised beneath the ceremonial uniform. He could feel the tension in the air rising like a tide. Cooper's breath had grown shallow. He could feel the telltale tightness spreading across his chest, the squeeze like a band being slowly tightened around his ribs. He slowed his pace further. Eyes darting discreetly for a place to rest, to collect himself, to breathe. But the palace courtyard offered no sanctuary, just tourists too busy with cameras to notice, and two shadows closing in. "Struggling there, old man?" Greg called out mockingly, his voice carrying far enough to draw curious glances from nearby tourists. His smile was wide, but not kind. It was the grin of a predator savoring the chase. Danny joined in, his tone thick with sarcasm. "You all right? You look a bit peaky. Bit out of breath." Cooper kept walking, military pride keeping his spine straight even as his lungs betrayed him. But each step felt heavier than the last. He reached for his inhaler, fingertips curling around it like a lifeline. But he hesitated. Displaying weakness would be a mistake. He had known men who died that way, in war zones and city streets alike. Maybe he needs some help, Danny said, now a few feet closer. The grin on his face didn't match his words. Oi, veteran. Greg called again. RAF, is it? Must have been something, back in the day. Bit past your prime now though, eh? Cooper stopped walking. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. His chest was heaving now. The inhaler sat in his pocket like a lead weight he dared not reveal. Guard Ashford watched the pair close in. His ceremonial rifle was held as per regulation, at rest, but his grip had tightened. His eyes flicked between the bullies and the veteran, calculating response times, distances, angles. He knew a confrontation was seconds away. He also knew he'd have only one chance to act. Just trying to get home, Cooper rasped, his voice rough with exertion. Leave me be. Oh, we'll help you home, Greg sneered. Right after you hand over whatever you've been clutching like it's gold. A woman nearby stepped forward. Leave him alone. Can't you see he's unwell? Danny snapped at her viciously, mind your business, love. His tone was sharp enough to send her stepping back quickly. Now they were flanking Cooper, one on each side. Cooper's eyes darted for escape but found none. His world was narrowing, his vision blurred, his lungs screamed, and his pride warred with survival. Then Danny saw the inhaler. His eyes lit up. There it is, he said, reaching forward. Let's see what you're hiding, Greg said as he grabbed Cooper's jacket and yanked. Cooper stumbled, nearly collapsing from the sudden movement. Greg was strong, and the veteran's balance was failing. Danny reached into the pocket and retrieved the inhaler like a trophy. Well, he mused, turning it in his hands. Looks expensive. Give it back, Cooper gasped, one hand clutching his chest. I can't. But the bullies weren't done yet. Not nearly, say please, Greg taunted, tossing the inhaler between his hands. Danny laughed, though even he seemed a touch uneasy now. The veteran's condition was worsening visibly. His face had gone pale, his hands trembled uncontrollably, and his knees were starting to buckle. Cooper fell to one knee, his thoughts raced. Training, drills, survival instincts, they all flared, but none could fight off the simple biological reality of oxygen deprivation. Memories flooded his mind, a flight deck, the roar of engines, medals pinned by a queen, comrades lost and honored. Now it might all end here, in the dirt, mocked by children who had no understanding of what he had given. You need this? Danny said, voice mocking, dangling the inhaler just out of reach. Then ask nice. Cooper raised a trembling hand. Please, he gasped. Greg's laugh was sharp and cruel. Look at you now. Begging. Guard Ashford's knuckles had gone white on his rifle. Every part of him screamed to act, but protocol held him still. Not yet. Not until the right moment. Not until he could strike with precision, and then Greg made the final mistake, with a sneer. He bent down, grabbed Cooper's RAF pin, and ripped it from his jacket. Souvenir, he smirked. Cooper collapsed fully, his chest rising only slightly now, the bluish tinge on his lips undeniable. Gasps escaped him, barely, and in that moment, something shifted. Ashford saw it. A signal passed silently between the two soldiers, one kneeling in collapse, the other standing watch. There was no ceremony now. No parade or formality, only duty, the final insult, the theft of the RAF pin, hung in the air like smoke after a battlefield blast. For a moment, time stood still. Greg sneered over Cooper, who lay wheezing, his body crumpled on the palace stones, lips now fully blue, eyes half-lidded. Danny twirled the inhaler in his hands like a toy. Cooper was dying, and Guard Ashford moved. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was precise. With a fluid grace born of military conditioning, Ashford broke formation. His bearskin hat did not shift, his posture never wavered. But in a blink, he had crossed the distance. Greg didn't even see him coming. One moment, he was grinning down at a struggling veteran. The next, his world turned upside down, literally. Ashford spun Greg around with startling force, twisting his arm behind him and pinning him in place. The soldier's other hand wrapped around Greg's throat, not a choke, but a hold so commanding, so controlled, that the threat was unmistakable. Greg froze. Whatever smirk had lived on his face vanished like fog under sunlight. Danny took a step forward, instinctively reaching toward his friend, but Ashford's boot met the back of Greg's knee, forcing him to the ground. The click of tendons under pressure and the pop of forced compliance echoed in the suddenly silent square. Danny halted mid-step, the tourists gasped. Phones came back up. Whispers rose in shock and awe. No one had expected the silent figure in red to become a storm. Ashford spoke, calm and authoritative. "RAF command, sir," he said as he knelt beside Cooper, inhaler in hand. "Deep breath on my mark." It wasn't just instruction. It was command. Years of discipline echoed through his voice, something Cooper's instincts could not ignore. Even through his haze, the veteran responded. Ashford pressed the inhaler into his hand, guiding it. 3. 2. Now. The hiss of the device broke the stillness. Cooper's lungs responded, slowly at first, then with urgency. Air returned like a long-lost friend. He collapsed back, gasping but breathing, the edge of death retreating inch by inch. Greg struggled under Ashford's grip, but it was no use. Ashford's voice cut clean through the moment. 2 tours Afghanistan. 1 Iraq. This uniform isn't a costume. It's a promise. Danny took another step, trying to slink away toward the crowd. 3 steps back, Ashford ordered without looking. "Hands where I can see them." Danny obeyed, not out of respect, but because something in Ashford's tone told him this man didn't bluff. Within minutes, the police arrived. Word had already spread through radio chatter: assault near Buckingham, veteran down, Royal Guard involved. The officers arrived briskly, their expressions taut but composed. When they saw Ashford standing with Greg restrained and Cooper now breathing normally again, the situation became clear. Officer Jones, Met Police, one of them introduced. "You'll be hearing from the Crown Prosecution Service," he told Greg and Danny as their hands were cuffed behind their backs. Greg's bravado returned in sputtered fragments. "This is assault. He choked me." "You'll find we've got the whole thing recorded," Officer Jones replied coolly, motioning to the surrounding tourists, many of whom had videos already circulating. "You can't, this isn't over." Greg shouted as he was led toward the waiting vehicle. "Yes, it is," the officer said flatly. Greg strained against the cuffs. Danny muttered curses under his breath, but none of it mattered anymore. Ashford turned back to Cooper, who had been helped to a bench by a young couple who'd finally dared to step in. The veteran's chest still rose heavily, but the worst had passed. He looked up at Ashford with weary, grateful eyes. Then, without a word, Cooper straightened as best he could and gave a crisp salute. His arm trembled, but the gesture was clean, proud, and filled with memory. Ashford returned it immediately, standing tall in perfect form. The 2 salutes, one from the past, one from the present, spoke of respect, duty, and a bond forged not by time but by service. No words were needed. A few feet away, a father whispered to his son, "That's what a real soldier looks like." Once the authorities had taken Greg and Danny away, and Cooper had received proper medical attention, Ashford resumed his post. To the untrained eye, it was as if nothing had happened. He stood once again, rigid and silent, eyes fixed in the regulation forward stare. Tourists resumed their photos. Some smiled, some nodded in quiet respect. A few children waved, but anyone who had seen what had just unfolded knew, the man in red was no ornament of tradition. He was the very embodiment of it. Behind the stoic stillness lived a soldier, one who had walked through war and never stopped watching. One who knew the difference between show and service. One who understood that the real weight of duty wasn't in medals or salutes, but in standing ready. Always, later, the Royal Guard's leadership would commend Ashford's actions. The footage would spread across the internet, drawing comments from veterans, civilians, and military families alike. Some would argue the ceremonial shouldn't be broken. Others would say tradition means nothing if it doesn't protect the people it's built to honor, but Ashford didn't think of any of that. He simply stood his watch, as he always had, as he always would. The courtyard, once tense and breathless, now stood in awed silence. Greg and Danny, who had just minutes earlier radiated arrogance and cruelty, were shackled by law, their eyes darting, first to the police officers beside them, then to the quiet crowd, then back to Ashford, whose impassive expression gave away nothing, but something in Ashford's posture had changed. Though he had returned to his position by the gate, restored to the ceremonial stance demanded of him, the crowd could sense it. Beneath the stillness was the iron. One officer leaned toward Greg, reciting charges in a voice free of sympathy: assault of a veteran, theft of medical equipment, obstruction and disturbance on palace grounds, harassment under aggravated circumstances. Danny tried to offer some explanation. "We didn't mean it to, he was fine, just needed a puff or something. We didn't even touch him like." "Save it for court," another officer interrupted, snapping the cuffs tighter as they were led away. Greg struggled weakly, but even he knew it was over. His eyes locked once more on Ashford, now once again, just a guard. And yet, that image was branded in his mind, the controlled fury, the combat movements, the eyes of a man who had seen more in war than any street brawler ever could. "You'll be hearing from my solicitor." Greg screamed one last time. It was bluster, and everyone knew it. No one responded. A murmur ran through the gathered tourists, shaken, humbled, and perhaps a little wiser than they had been an hour ago. Children clung to their parents, instinctively feeling the gravity of what they'd witnessed. Veterans in the crowd stood taller. One man removed his cap and held it to his chest in silent salute. Cooper sat, still regaining his breath. The second dose of his inhaler had worked, but exhaustion clung to him like fog. His shoulders were slouched now, but not from shame, from the toll taken on a body that had already given so much. A paramedic knelt beside him, checking vitals, whispering questions, but Cooper's attention was fixed elsewhere, on Ashford. The soldier had not spoken again. He didn't need to. Cooper pushed himself upright, chest still heaving slightly. Despite the ache in every joint, despite the embarrassment of vulnerability, he did what generations of servicemen had done before him. He raised his hand to his brow and delivered a salute. It was imperfect, wobbly, slow, full of tremor, but it was filled with the strength of memory and meaning. That single motion transcended ceremony. It reached back decades to desert winds, engine roars, bunkers and barracks. It said, "You saw me. You stood for me. We are brothers." Guard Ashford, his gaze locked on the horizon, gave no verbal reply. But his salute in return was sharp, textbook, and carried more weight than 1,000 words. And though his body remained perfectly poised, anyone truly watching would see the glint of understanding in his eyes, a soldier acknowledging another. Across time, across pain, the crowd broke into soft applause, not the loud, touristy kind, but the gentle ripple of people who had just witnessed something real. After the officers and medics had gone, and the courtyard began to return to its usual rhythm, a few tourists lingered near the guard rails, watching Ashford with newfound reverence. "He didn't move at all," a child whispered to her mother. "No," the mother replied. "Until he did, and then he moved like lightning." The comment lingered in the air. To many, the royal guards were symbols. Statues in red. Characters from postcards and history books. Few ever saw them as living soldiers, battle-hardened, duty-bound men and women who carried more than rifles and tradition, but Ashford had reminded everyone of the truth. That these uniforms didn't hide weakness. They armored strength. They were built not just for show, but for service, the kind that doesn't end when the parade does. A few veterans approached Cooper later, offering him a water bottle, a word of respect, or a nod that said, "I've been there too." Cooper took them all with grace. Nearby, a reporter spoke quietly to a guard officer, scribbling down quotes. Soon, the story would spread. A viral video. A headline on Defense News. A clip on evening television. But those who had been there, really been there, would always know that no screen could fully capture the moment when a man nearly died in front of a palace, and another man, sworn to stillness, chose justice instead. Guard Ashford did not ask for recognition. He did not stay for interviews. He made no speeches. After a brief debrief with palace security and the police, he quietly returned to duty. The weight of the bearskin hat, the formality of the rifle, the hours of unmoving discipline, he embraced it all as he always had, but something in him was different now. Or perhaps, more accurately, something had been seen, because now the public knew, behind those still eyes was not just tradition, but vigilance. Ashford thought briefly of his tours in Helmand province, of the friends who hadn't come home, of the boyish recruits turned into hardened men beside him. He thought of the oath he'd sworn, not just to protect country or crown, but to stand for something bigger. He had not broken character today. He had fulfilled it. As the sun began to set again, casting its gold across the courtyard once more, Ashford remained at his post, unmoved and steady, and somewhere nearby, Cooper rested, not just breathing, but remembered. The video ends with a message to viewers: not all uniforms are worn for show. Not all battles are fought on foreign soil. And not all heroes wear medals. Sometimes, the strongest warriors stand silent, until their silence becomes action. If this story touched you, remember to respect the people who stand watch, often unseen, because real courage doesn't always march. Sometimes, it stands. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like and share it. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring videos. Thanks again and see you in the next one.